want to make sure that whatever legislative, I'll coin this phrase, legislative interventions we put forward, we have to invite more people to the table so we don't have more unintended consequences when we're just thinking up here about what makes sense because this is what I've done in my regular job. No, we have to be creative. We have to be thoughtful, and we have to invite more people to the table to understand before we make it a clear law that's going to have more positive, more added value than negative consequence.
Have you been feeling disconnected, worried, or overwhelmed in life, or when you look at the state of our country and the world? If so, you're not alone. I'm right there with you, and you're in the right place. Hi, friends. Welcome to the Connected Way podcast. I'm your host and minister of connection, Rev Dev. I believe that connection is the healing path forward for us as individuals and as a collective. So on this podcast, we will explore all things connection to self, to others, to the land, and spirituality. But specifically in season 1, we are looking at the coming election through the lens of connection, how we can get informed and involved in politics and this election in digestible and engaging ways, how our spiritual and cultural beliefs and values intersect with and inform politics, how this election fits in with the larger evolution of our society, and how we can actually connect with people in these polarizing times. I know that connection has the capacity to move the needle in this election and in our individual and collective evolution. May it be so. Let's get into it. Friends, as you know, it is my intention with this podcast to gain perspective for myself and hopefully for you by connecting with different people from different spiritual and cultural backgrounds to understand what makes them operate, what they care about, and why they vote the way that they vote, as well as what issues are important to them. So today we are bringing a very important perspective into the conversation that I surely do not have. The perspective of being a person of color in the U.S. Today, we are joined by Atiim Boykin, who I met when I was considering joining Leadership Portland, which is a civics engagement leadership program that's run here in Portland. And he convinced me rather quickly to join that program, but also he gained a fan that day. I was like, this guy is awesome. And we had a lot in common and just really hit it off. And he is a Black man and is here to share some of his experience with you, but also has a really interesting background that is not just talking to him as a Black man, because there's a lot more to him than the color of his skin, obviously. But also he has some really interesting experience that I think will lend itself to the conversation. So let me introduce you formally to Atiim. Atiim is a clinician, case manager, storyteller, musician, songwriter, painter, and spoken word poet, as if that's not enough. As a student of and leader in these roles, he's spent more than 20 years working with nonprofits, government agencies, and schools focused on providing equity, access, and inclusion to stabilization and growth resources via educational and therapeutic supports. Barrier removal is central to Atiim's career. Anything he does professionally or creatively promotes community health, renewal, and resilience. We love that. In terms of employment, Atiim currently works for the Department of Health and Human Services as a forensic intensive case manager in all of Cumberland County, which is where Portland, Maine is, everybody. He supports returning citizens with reentry coming from state prison, county jails, or participating in community supervision through probation. Everyone he serves has a significant mental health diagnosis and other barriers to stabilization in the community at large. He facilitates community linkages and connections within 90 days of release and follows some cases longer term when individuals are chronically mentally ill and homeless. He is a counselor, and so this is incredible work that he's doing. But I also want to highlight something that he has done previously, which was a highlight in his career. He served as a staff therapist in Kamala Harris's Back on Track program, which then led him to being the co-founder and director of clinical case management for the Young Adult Court in San Francisco. This was a first of its kind collaborative court serving criminal justice involved 18 to 25-year-old young adults, With programming based on the developing prefrontal cortex, Young Adult Court extends opportunities for restitution and restorative justice through highly engaging therapeutic supports, community linkages, and job training. Such important work that Atiim has done. In addition to the work that he has done in those realms, he's also deeply involved in the arts. Since 2001, Atiim has owned and operated Rida Rida Entertainment as an umbrella of all of his creative endeavors. And there are many. An audio and lighting design company, voiceovers, paintings, a record label producing personal music and multimedia projects. He's worked as an electrician and rigger for private and public shows, helping create lighting and sound environments for public and private parties, weddings, corporate events, and grassroots community events. And while living in Oakland, California, he produced grassroots community multimedia events as 1,000 Words, bringing community together, raising money and awareness for global and local causes. So originally from Oakland, California, Atiim lived in the Bay Area basically his entire life until moving to Maine in 2018. He lives in the West End of Portland with his wife and daughter. And in addition to everything I have just listed, he is incredibly involved in the community. And Atiim is now running for Portland, Maine City Council District 2. I think he is a great choice for District 2. He wants to hear the voices of his constituents and advocate for their needs and desires. He and I spoke about his desire, and one of the things he plans to do is actually connect with his constituents, setting up quarterly town hall meetings to connect with and hear from them. I absolutely love that idea because this is one of the issues that is really complicated and very unfortunate in politics is that a lot of politicians don't connect that well with their constituents. That is hopefully changing, especially with this election. And I think Atiim is a great guy and he will be a great city councilor when he's elected. Oh, team.
That's a lot. That's a lot. I know.
Such a bio.
I know.
No surprise because you are incredible, but wow, it's a lot. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me. So I thought maybe I was dying, seeing my life go beyond, past my eyes. I thought I was transcending or something.
It would be a good obituary.
Like, bring him back.
Yes, totally. All right. Atiim, we've heard a little bit about, well, a lot, frankly, about your professional background and your arts and your interests. Yeah. But I'd love to hear more about how and where you grew up. Obviously, it was Oakland, but like what type of situations you grow up in? What was your background and what shaped you as an individual?
Yeah, I got to say, the title of your podcast and show is how I grew up. I'm Generation X. Growing up in a time where Calvin wasn't yet on the milk carton. The disconnect started happening when we started really highlighting all of the tragedies, which, need some light. But I think fear started to grow in the families with the kids being missing and all the rest. There's some highlights that came out of it, I think, but also during a time when video games weren't the norm. They were just starting up. So we had outside time all the time. I grew up in Oakland, California, and the Fruitvale District. The Fruitvale District is right below 580, right above 880, which separates the industrial part of Oakland. Okay. You have between the 880 and the 580, which is all the neighborhoods and apartments. And above 580, you're starting to get into more of the money, the hills, and the incomes just rise as the altitude does. I mean, Kamala Harris from Oakland, right? Yeah. And I'm from Oakland, and we both, and I got to serve with her in San Francisco. And here it is. She's running for president. I'm running for District 2 City Council.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So where I grew up, I had white elder people that were retiring in place. There were some young white kids in the neighborhood, Samoan families, El Salvadorian families, Mexican families, Chinese. I had a Korean friend go and take my shoes off and get warm milk with him at his house. It was diverse. We were out there playing double dutch and skateboards and bicycles, tag. And, we were able to ride our bikes until the streetlights came on. So I grew up really connected in a very diverse way. So, yeah, I love that. And I try to recreate that wherever I go.
Yeah, I love that. And can you share with us how you ended up in the professional lane that you did? Obviously, you became a counselor, but now you work a lot with people coming out of the prison system and the incarcerated and community support. And so how did your career end up where it has?
Initially I had told all of my family that I was going to be a pediatrician. I had the Cosby bug. I was inspired by this obstetrician who was delivering babies. And I said, I want to be an obstetrician too. But then I said, you know what? I didn't realize the privilege I had at the time with the insurance that we had consistently through Kaiser Permanente in Oakland. But I really had an ongoing relationship with my pediatrician. I said, you know what? I love the idea of delivering babies, but I would rather have a longer relationship with a family. So I thought I would major in biology and minor in Pan-African studies, right? I had come from Berkeley High School where they had the only Black studies department in a high school setting and across the United States. So I grew up with activists shaping the way for me, including my parents, because our names reflect the Black Power movement out of Oakland. So I was very hyper aware of the Black experience because I was surrounded by a Black family with history from New York, with grandparents who went around the world on ships, who had experiences in other lands of racism and returning to this land from war with racism. Our father made sure we stayed abreast of our ancestry and our Black culture. He was very proud. My mother was very proud of us to be really clear about us being Black in this experience. So that I think as a father now, I want to make sure that my daughter, who's half Jewish and white, and the other part of her is all this mixed blood and African blood that of course is through her vein, that just because she's half of something else doesn't mean she's going to be treated fully that way. So I try to take every moment I can when she's ready to shape her experience in a way that's going to protect her by knowing and not be ignored. So she's, at a loss. So it's kind of like somewhat of an inoculation. So, for me, what shaped my experience or my professional career has been that primarily. And then, as I grew up, one of my uncles told me, rest in peace, Bernardo Hutton, he says, you have to understand, and he was one of my mentors, that there's a red zone for young Black men. Mm-hmm. He says, and this is him loving me and giving me some guidance. He says, from the time you are 14 to the time you're about 35, there's lots of opportunities that the world may take to end your life. He says, so you have to fortify yourself with self-confidence, with prayer, and make sure you don't put yourself in positions consciously that could be misinformed or put yourself in a situation, be at the wrong place at the wrong time. You have to have more filters than white kids. You got to work 3 or 4 times as hard to be even seen on a similar level as someone who's not trying hard at all. He says, so, you have a lot of work that you need to do in order to be seen and to be heard and to be safe. And that right there was a mouthful, but it was always now this conscious of how do I need to prepare myself? That was a Rubik's Cube. And now what do I do to make it to beyond 35? So as I went to school for biology, I took a moment and I needed some money. I was working at the microfiche and film library. Yeah. I got into school and there was some affirmative action with some funds and still took on a boatload of debt that I still have. And I worked at a group home. And at the group home, I got the glimpse were mostly young Black kids. And I was taken aback, wait a minute, I thought we were only, almost 14% of the entire nation's population.
Can you clarify, Atiim, a group home? What type of group home?
So this was a group home called Rancho San Antonio Boys Home of the West.
Okay.
And Rancho San Antonio had 6 different complexes. Each had 2 sides to it. And they would house boys with very specific issues, whether they were a sexual predator, were they sexually abused, were there, so they went down a list of different areas to focus on their counseling and support. And
so who was putting them in these homes?
These were wards of the state. These were people who, I guess, foster care as well.
Okay.
Yeah. Both. And then you had a small house for the younger kids who were not in their teens.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Keep going.
So I saw that and I saw the impact I was having. And I'm a musician. So I was aspiring to do music over everything. But I knew I'm a carpenter and I do all the rest. So I had to stay afloat. And I switched gears midway through my biology major and said, social sciences is where it's at, because I need to be in this room where there's primarily white people in power supporting mostly people of color and Black kids. And as I went along that career track, I noticed in every setting I went to, in the Bay Area at least, okay, and maybe this is consistent across the board, that I noticed that the number of Black and brown and people of color that were being served, mostly Black, from children to young adults to adults, were disproportionate number to the number of staff that were Black or brown, meaning there were more white staff or non-Black people serving primarily Black folks. So that hooked me. And I said, okay, I felt like a calling.
Yeah. Well, you've definitely listened to that calling and you're doing such amazing work. And I so appreciate everything that you're saying, both in terms of your inspiration, but also your background. And it's humbling and important for white people to hear about experiences of Black children being told that they're, between the ages of 14 and 35 are going to have to basically be careful, but also, be prepared for the fact that they're going to have to work harder for opportunities. And yeah, thank you for sharing all that you have shared. It's important to hear. Yeah. So moving on to the big topic at hand, let's talk about the election.
Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about the election. So we're going to talk about the larger election, which is the presidential election and everything that's going on sort of countrywide. Obviously, there's so many different elections that are happening, including yours with city council. So we're going to start with the larger election and then sort of come back down to smaller scale. So as an African-American man, as a Black man, I would love to hear your perspective about this election overall. Like, can you give us a sense of what your impression is of this election, what its significance is for the overall impact for African-American people and our country? What are you thinking here, Atiim?
It's, I guess anytime somebody takes a risk of talking about politics or religion or any other hot topic that might be polarizing, or so many variations of what people believe or feel, it can create friends, it can create enemies. And so I'm always cautious about talking about my views around politics, but there's some courage in there too. I have to say, I have been asked quite a bit of questions from constituents in District 2 about where I stand with the divestment that happened in Portland.
Yes, right.
And at that point,
for everybody who is, because there are people who listen who are not in it, there was a vote within the city council about divesting from Israel, basically, like all city of Portland investments, anything that's used by the city of Portland that is in any way beneficial or part of the war in Israel-Palestine to be divested. And that was passed unanimously within the city council. So that's what Atiim is talking about.
Thanks for clarifying. It's a hot topic. And,
yes.
From what I hear, the Jewish community members that I've spoken to are hurt because they don't feel like they were included in the conversation, even if they had their mind set up, the parties that got the unanimous divestment, symbolically to set a precedent, maybe to give other cities the opportunity to stand up and do the same. On one hand, people feel like this small city, big city of Maine has no business saying anything about global issues. Okay. And on the other hand, people believe that somebody needs to say something because nobody's being heard.
Right.
So that is kind of the two pieces that are on the table there. But the Jewish community members that I talked to feel hurt because they would have preferred to be at the table to have conversations prior to the divestment. I get that. And I get that. So here's this large, big election with two parties that are not going to stop or create a ceasefire because there's been plenty of opportunity. And we're talking about like in Gaza with the Israel war on Gaza, and some would say very strongly genocide.
Right.
So I'm very sad about what I see.
Yes.
So with Kamala Harris, the plus is she's a brown woman that from my hometown that my daughter is going to say it's possible for me to one day be there. And on the other hand, we have a guy who's galvanizing like this opportunity to let the voices of the people who have been unheard or marginalized in a certain way speak up and say whatever it is, whether be it ill, be it misinformed, be it necessary at all to be heard. He's giving it voice. And so here it is, voice again and being heard from the local level of not being heard and creating pain and polarization to the national realm where the people who feel like they haven't had a voice are getting a voice. So you have this other candidate who's giving voice to this constituent group. So I just think that people want to be heard. And in what's going on with the politics, I can't spiritually, where it starts for me, get behind anyone who is business as usual and allowing such atrocious behavior happen. So, and then you have the fear mongering around, if you don't vote for Kamala, which I would love to vote for Kamala, I'm having a hard time because of not hearing anything about being a peacemaker. And that's where I come from, peacemaking.
Yeah. I mean, I think, so I had someone on the podcast, I had a rabbi on the podcast who is a strong advocate for ceasefire and has been very vocal about that from the beginning for the last year. It's been now over a year. And so that was an amazing conversation. I too feel that a ceasefire is necessary. And I think an arms embargo is necessary. I don't understand all the ins and outs of all of this. And I know that there is strong views around Israel being able to defend itself, but it doesn't feel like defense at all anymore. No. It feels like very aggressive offense.
Enough is enough.
So it's confusing to me as well. And I agree. I wish that Kamala was being stronger about her stance on Israel-Palestine. And that was the one thing that felt very disconnected for me about the Democratic National Convention was the lack of voices around the Palestinian voice and Palestinian Americans not being allowed to speak when asked so strongly. And so I agree with you, Atiim, but I also feel like there's definitely a better chance of peace with a leader. In my mind, Kamala has a much better chance of being respected in international circles and also listening to people who have different views rather than someone who only cares about his own voice. And, it's interesting to me hearing you say that I believe you're saying that Donald Trump is giving voice to white people. I believe you're talking about like largely white evangelical Christians who are Christian nationalists, we should say, because they're not there are definitely evangelicals who are not Christian nationalists and who are not Trump fans, but that feel that they haven't had a voice, which is interesting. That's a really good point, Team. And actually, you're pushing my boundaries a bit which is good for me to be pushed on my edges because to me, those voices are scary. But it is interesting to hear you say like those are people who have felt oppressed and that they have not felt that their voices have been heard. To me, those are not the oppressions that I am as worried about as I am about people of color or trans people or women, or there's a different group of people who have been oppressed who do not have a voice with Donald Trump, even remotely, and in fact would be harmed. So that's an interesting point for sure. And I understand where you're coming from. And I know you are not alone. And I know you are not alone at all with the listeners on this podcast. Also, there are a lot of people who have concerns with how the Democrats have handled the Israel-Palestine conflict. I think there's more people who are concerned about how Trump would handle it. But I understand where you're coming from. So let's not talk necessarily about the candidates, but more about the issues. Let's get into some of the issues at play.
Can I just slide this other two pieces in there?
Yeah.
There's two other candidates. The display of who's running is boiled down to two viable. Besides that, using critical thinking is the ones who have control of the media. You have Brother Cornel West, who I've always loved because he speaks from his spirit. My spirit screams his name because he talks to my spirit. And that's because that's where my filter comes from first. Spirit, right? speaks to my spirit. I remember seeing him in San Francisco, and he told my brother and I, my youngest brother and I, to come to the front of the station to shake our hand because we were one of very few black men in the room. So there's a connection there. So he's not being placed as a viable candidate. Then you have Jill Stein. So it boils down to two candidates that you have to consider and two candidates that they are trying to keep out of their orbit. And I get it. Politically, Kamala Harris would have a well-oiled machine, a bunch of money and power to move. And on the other hand, the Green Party is probably more viable because of their length of time in the game and having constituents in states and cities than would the Peace and Justice Party that Brother Cornel West runs because he's just getting off the ground. So either way, he has to continue in order to entice more people to join his party and act in civic life from towns to state. And yeah, boy, that's what I want to just toss in there because there's two people that's not even being shown.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that I struggle with this, I do believe that voting for either of them is taking the vote away probably from Kamala Harris, which is what I'm concerned about, right? I understand there's so many different avenues of going about changing the system, and this is a very complicated and broken system, obviously, that we are dealing with our government. But that doesn't necessarily mean to me like, hey, I'm not going to throw my vote away. I also have pretty big issues with Jill Stein. But anyways, that's me. So, but that's what worries me is like, please don't take votes because like for me, it's anything but Trump. Please right. And I do think that Kamala Harris is going to have better people surrounding her. She is going to have a better organization, a better cabinet. She's going to have good people hopefully helping her. But I think that the system is broken. And actually, I have been really curious about the Working Families Party, which is doing really good work in smaller races. So not putting someone up for president, but I think they have the capacity to potentially help change the system. And that's a separate party. And they want a multi-party system instead of a two-party system, which I think could be really important and a good move moving forward. Yeah. It's just a question of how do we do that in a smart way and maybe not when there is a terrifying outcome potential. So, yeah, but I hear you and I appreciate you bringing their voices up. I think it's important. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the issues at hand in this election. So I would love to hear from you what your understanding is, especially because you're an activist, you're a Black man, and you have a different perspective than I do. What are the implications for people? Let's just start with the big one. What are the implications for Black people and their needs around abortion? Because it is a big part of the conversation right now.
I mean, we're talking about generations. It's different in generations. I have siblings who are millennial and even below that. Mm-hmm. The thought usually really centers around whether or not somebody has a religious faith. Mm. And even within the religious faith, there's, my family is kind of different Christians across the board. My father was Orthodox Muslim. Mm. I have Muslim family members and Christian family members. And, I think if they thought secularly, having the choice is important. Mm. And beyond the choice, being legally available, following their spiritual guidance as the primary source of decision making. So there's a lot of guilt around abortion for, let's say, Catholic girls.
Oh, yeah.
And Christian girls. And I would even say Muslim or anybody else who believes in that spirit piece. But it ultimately boils down to having the opportunity to decide for yourself. I mean, if we have free wills as we do, then we have to decide for ourselves and live with whatever consequences we wish to. And, I think abortion is something that shouldn't be used as birth control, but I'm not in every situation, in every position to make those calls. I've had partner have an abortion earlier on in my life where just preparing to be a father and she had to think, if I have this child, will I go to college? And had to make a decision. It was painful. Yeah. It was painful. I think about what my child would be right now, who they would be. And then I think, maybe she spared us both something. And you never know because the potential was just potential. And ultimately she made a decision to manage her career and direct her life in a way that she saw fit, which is fine. I think having choice is paramount.
Yeah, I agree. And my impression is that, and I think this is scientific fact, that maternal death is higher in African-American women. There's, mortality rates that are important to consider. But I think that it sometimes is painted in the media, of course, the media, as women of color are more likely to have more pregnancies or are more likely to end up pregnant in an unwanted situation or to end up on welfare or whatever it is. And it's not about abortion in my mind. It's about the system as a whole. Like, we need to take care of everybody. We need to take care of families. We need to give people opportunities, and the amount of oppression that has been experienced by many people, but I think especially Black people, has kept them from having as many opportunities, which means they need more support. But that's not just take away abortion. It's like, actually, let's help people. Let's give people affordable childcare and opportunities to go to college and not still be in debt. And how can we help build a system that works, as opposed to just addressing one issue that becomes something that people can hang their hats on?
Right.
Sorry, I'm on a soapbox, but
no, that soapbox is necessary. I think to go back and say, hey, look, when we're talking about people of color, women of color, we're talking about especially Black women, Black men. Look, we've already been experimented on. You to go back to enslavement. There's a lot of experimentation on our human bodies. Anyway, there's a level of fear and distrust that comes with medical and that anyway.
Yes. Right.
But, Black women still have the opportunity to choose when there's a law that says that they can't. So, maybe if they're thinking like the Black woman I just spoke about, she was Black, by the way, she had to make a decision for a career. Right. She wanted to be a lawyer. Yeah. And I haven't followed her career, but I would imagine that she is. She was very focused. I think when you don't have the choice, we've already had the reality of not having a choice in many things.
Yeah.
And so I still think it's really important.
And I think to that, there's definitely on the table is a lot of tax questions. Like, how much will people be taxed? How much will the rich be taxed? Will there be an education system? Like, Project 2025 wants to remove the Department of Education, as well as FEMA and other things that are essential in my mind for everybody. But in terms of people who are living in poverty, there are definitely a lot of Black people who need support, who need welfare, who need the education system, and who need basically like a generally running system, as we all do. But my concern is that should Project 2025 become a thing, that the oppression and also the disadvantages will become worse rather than better. That's my impression. And I'm wondering if you see that, if that feels like a consideration right now with the tax propositions and Project 2025 and other things that are being considered right now in this election.
I think you've even had affirmative action attacked, and this idea of reverse racism, which is ridiculous because, your first taste of feeling like there's competition or an exclusion or a highlight of somebody else is not proof that you're being oppressed. It means that now you have to compete. And maybe competition and having a VIP pass to walk to the front door is difficult to transition to. But as somebody who's had to work 4 times hard and in my estimation, it's every system that is in place right now should stay in gear. And there should simultaneously be work towards the system that is creating these negative impacts from oppression. Higher numbers of incarceration. But, this is history. This is history. People come to a locale to build ships and planes, and they're making money for the first time. They're flooding the areas during World War II and I. And then when the system's done making its war machine, they're not able to get jobs. Just like here in Maine, when they moved from wood to steel ships, the Black people fled where they were able to make some money. So, it's really about the messy parts of our system from, Black businesses and communities being destroyed, like Tulsa. And that's just one example. Tulsa, Oklahoma, to being forced to deal with systems that are now on the chopping block to be cut. So, from bank loans to access to housing, all the stuff that we're dealing with locally and nationally have always been concerns for Black people. So I think 2025 is ridiculous. I think everybody but Trump should be moved forward, because if that happens, that 2025 happens, there's going to be more chaos.
Oh, yeah. That's yeah. So what would you say, Atiim? I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I'm really taking in and appreciating, like, these issues are not new, right? All the issues are issues from the Black perspective. Are there specific issues that you think are more important to Black voters than, like, disproportionately, right, than issues or concerns that I would have? Are there issues that are important?
Equal opportunity to have funding for small businesses. This is something that I think Kamala Harris is tossing out there, which sounds really good. These are good incentives. She's talking about potentially 25,000. Well, I think it's 25,000. I even heard 50,000. I haven't turned the radio on in a couple of days because I'm just been focused on what I'm doing. But for people, first-time home buyers,
right?
But then here's this healthy distrust, right? In Black psychology, and there is a separate thing called Black psychology. I went to Pan African Studies at Cal State Northridge, and there was a Black psychology course from Black psychologists and people in the mental health field. And there's a healthy paranoia. When you've been told so many times that you're going to get certain things and they don't pay out, you stop believing and you just say, yeah, I believe it when I see it.
Which creates a healthy sense of apathy, which is not good for anybody. And it's definitely not good for a democracy. Our mutual friend, Andrew Zorro, was on the podcast and specifically talked about how apathy is the downfall of democracy. And so I can imagine that if there's a healthy sense of distrust, this sense of paranoia, like, okay, whatever, like, you keep saying these things, which is a very political thing to do, and then it doesn't actually happen, then of course it's like, why would I listen to anything that you're going to say? And why does it matter who's in office if they're all just going to say good things, but not actually do anything? Which I do think also does come from, the many years of there being a split Senate Congress. It's almost as if it is not almost, it is that we need to have, in my mind, the Democratic Party be the majority in the House, Senate, and hold the presidency. And that's when actually things can get done. Obviously, that's what helps. There's a lot of stagnancy that happens when it is not one party moving things forward, especially right now when things are so bipartisan. And like, there used to be a lot more collaboration and like, oh yeah, I'm a Republican, but I would vote for this bill because I believe that it's what's right. Now, there's a lot more division, and that divide is way bigger. So yeah, that's interesting. That's helpful to understand. So are there, like, do you know people, I'm assuming you do you know people who like don't care about voting at all?
Yeah, in fact, I met an anarchist in town here, and I'm not, and a white woman who says, the only time I voted was for Obama, and I'm thinking about registering to vote for you. Because we had a conversation, and I've seen her in the neighborhood long before I decided to run. And that to me was inspiring, that somebody who doesn't want to participate sees a light in me and respects me as a community member and would want to register to participate in my ability to sit on the chair. So, I mean, but when I talk to, Black people in my family, outside of my family, that's kind of extended family, some will not vote at all because of that disinterest. You don't really care about me. So why should I participate in something that you guys say the same thing over and over again? I heard it through the grapevine. I heard it through my family line. And I'm not, you're not going to fool me again because I've been fooled 3 times already. Right.
Yeah, that's such a hard, complicated thing about the system because it does require that basically all the branches are, in one party in order for things to move that way right now, which is too bad because it does create a lot of promises that are not followed for sure. Yeah. And I wonder, team, so some of the other big issues that are on the table, right? There's like immigration, guns is a big one, and climate change, and just like the idea of democracy, which I have a comment about. But are there Is there anything that you want to share about, let's say, those three issues? So guns, immigration, or climate change, and how that affects Black people in America?
I mean, they're all related to Black people in
Yeah.
America, or Black people trying to come into America,
Right.
right? The whole fear-mongering thing is you have to have all these guns because the Black people are going to come get you. That happened during the Reconstruction time, right? All the propaganda around Negroes stealing your watermelons and chickens, all that stuff, you know. It's a lot of propaganda,
Right.
fear-mongering to get people to have guns. And then you see the guns being used primarily on people of the same persuasion. Circumstances in Los Angeles where, you know, folks would tell me, I went to Cal State Northridge at one point in my graduated from Cal State Northridge, and it was a commuter school. So I had people who were coming in from parts of Los Angeles, different parts. Some would wear purple, some would wear red, some would wear blue, and they all knew each other's hoods. And these were all areas that were like blood meant family, cousin meant family.
Right.
But it got turned into something else. But they were being set up. You know, here's guns coming into a community that doesn't have planes and ships, and dope coming into communities that don't have planes and ships. Nonetheless, now they're fighting and killing each other. So, and then we're talking about high numbers in jail and being taken away from the community. A lot of disruption after the Black Power movement on purpose, in my opinion. There's a lot of how did all of a sudden it become gangs, and when it was nothing but churches and community organization overnight.
Right.
It was a switch flipped. So when you talk about immigration, it's like you think about all of the people coming in from Europe as our guests that can stay here and work and all the rest. And then you got people being turned away to their death from Haiti, or, you know, the fear of African immigrants coming here. And, you know, with guns, there's two parts to that. That piece that relates to Black folks, another piece where it's like, okay, well, if I walked around Portland, Maine with a gun on my hip, and a white guy walked around Portland, Maine with a gun on his hip, who would spark more fear?
Right.
You know, it's open carry. It's open carry. So, you know, and that ties to the Black Panther movement, right? The Black Panther movement in Oakland, California, they got Ronald Reagan. They were across the street from Ronald Reagan when he was governor of California. And he said, that's enough. We're not going to have these Negroes walking around here with guns. So they banned open carry in California at the time, because they don't want conscious people trying to change or just protect themselves and support the community with the ability to also protect themselves.
Right.
So yeah, guns, immigration, and then you said, what was the third one? Climate change. Again, it's no different than, hey, I'm gonna commandeer your neighborhood by doing an eminent domain and running the freeway right through it. Right. You know, or you're going to have your community down in the industrial part of Oakland. Or, hey, look, you Wabanaki folks, we're just going to pollute up here and get our paper mill, and you don't even have sovereignty over the water. We're just going to let you have the crumbs and be grateful. If you're not at the table, if you don't have a big economic gain from it, then you are kind of stuff that's actually coming out the pipes from the water, from the paper mill. You know, you're the smoke in the smokestack.
And actually, this reminds me of something that I talked about with the rabbi that I mentioned to you, Rabbi Salem Pierce. She specifically said that in order to thrive, Jews need to be living within a multi-faith, multiracial democracy. And I think that is true. That really stuck with me. And I think that is true for any people who have been oppressed. I think it is true for all of us that we should all be living in a democracy that is multi-faith and multiracial, that our government, should it be multi-faith and multiracial, it would actually affect positive change that is for everybody, right? So that's my hope, is that that's more of what we're moving towards, is multi-faith and multiracial. And there's a lot about the system that needs to change in order for that to happen. But people need to vote in order for that to happen also. Obviously. Right. Yeah. So I appreciate that. And also specifically, with climate change, it disproportionately affects people who are not privileged, because people in privilege will put down and oppress people who are not as privileged as them, and will take the resources. And that is completely unacceptable and not okay. So that obviously needs to shift.
The last thing to that is, you know, when we're talking about the privilege, a really good mentor of mine, Dr. Carol McKinley Alvarez, San Francisco. She lives in Richmond. She taught me about privilege. She says, we have earned privileges and born privileges, and that might be different for us all. So the earned privileges for me would be my education.
Yeah.
There's also, you have the assets and so anyway, and the born privileges depends on the setting, right? I mean, like I can walk through Oakland or a Black neighborhood and maybe not be harassed and I just fit right in. And, as opposed to like you walking through a Black neighborhood, maybe you will be harassed, maybe not. Who knows? Right. But I would probably I wouldn't have to think about it.
Right.
Where you might have to think about it. Right. So these different privileges, whether it be woman, man of color, white man, all play a role. And then the earned privileges like my degrees or, or money that I've made or inherited might work in my favor. Look at the disasters that are happening right now. If we see that the hotel prices are going up for people fleeing from Carolinas, for fleeing from Florida, if you don't have even a bus ticket dollar, then you can't go.
Right.
You're left behind. So you're going to be impacted by the disaster. And if you can't afford a plane ticket or don't have a car or in a wheelchair, and nobody's coming to save you or evacuate you, they're just saying, go, and you don't have that, then that's a barrier.
Yeah. It does feel like climate change in general and some of these other issues, but climate change, because it's what we're talking about, is going to make the wealth gap or the implications of the wealth gap wider, right?
And seen.
Yes, and seen and really highlight them. But also it means that we really need to make some change here. Hello. So yeah, I super appreciate that. Well, thank you so much, Atiim, for talking about all of that. It's really helpful. I would like to take a couple of minutes to focus on you running for office because it's so awesome. And so you are now running for office to become the city councilor representing the 2nd District of Portland. Why did you decide to run for office? What prompted this and inspired you to get involved?
Well, I always dreamed about politics. Why would I do that? Kept thinking, well, it's not me. These images of what I thought politicians were. And, I got to meet and talk to a few here in town. I said, it kind of demystified the fact that they're just regular people like you and I. Then I got engaged with Leadership Portland. And this was, 2019. I got into Leadership Portland. I worked for Portland Ovations. They said, yeah, go for it. And I went for it. And then the pandemic hit. So here it is. All of a sudden, it's like wartime. It's like the governors are on the TV stations and it's a state of emergency. Bureaucracy is kind of tampered down so the flow of money and rules can be made to circumnavigate what would be roadblocks. And I got to see these same leaders make time to speak to us about their jobs. Kate Snyder did an excellent job. I'm going to take a page out of her book. She was doing Zoom hours for the city.
Kate Snyder was the mayor of Portland, everybody. Yeah. During COVID. Yeah.
These leaders volunteered time while they could have legitimately said to us, we're too busy to even talk to you.
Right.
They gave us insight into what was going on during this crisis mode time. And I got to see leadership working in real time, and I think creatively, because in a time where there's crisis, I like to say that resilience has a heavy ingredient, the heavy dose of the ingredient creativity. And so I got to see the creativity in motion, and that called to my spirit because I'm creative.
Yeah. Sure.
With all that I do creatively, I think that a lot of great new things come out of that creative juice that we use. And I saw it in real time and it inspired me. And the program itself gave me an understanding of like, these people are regular people who moved here from here and there and want to see change at a city level and want to do their part in the world, in this nation. And I said, that's me too. I do it every day. Why not?
Right.
And then I said, enough trying to talk to, well, here's another little caveat. I understand that our current District 2 counselor had received some threats.
Right.
But I've never met her.
Oh, you've never met her?
Never met her.
Interesting.
We reached out to her over email, and what we got in return was a full-time job. I'm a social worker. And if a client calls me and says, hey, I have an issue, I'll say, give me a minute. I'm going to circle back to you. Let's figure this out. And I didn't feel, maybe it was an impact of some of the threats you received, but I didn't get a warm welcome or the feeling that I would be heard.
I mean, I think it's a complicated issue, and I got so interested in this when I learned that city councilors really didn't get paid. I was like, what? Like, how do you, like, okay, so then there's this tough thing of like Andrew Zarl was a wildly engaged counselor, and that's how I ended up getting to know more about the council, because he was my District 4 counselor, and he was very responsive. He was like, yes, I know this is an issue. He had the most issues of any counselor in his district, and he was very responsive. It was basically like a 40 to 60 hour a week job that he was not getting paid for, and he had another job. And I was astonished by that. And then I was like, oh, well, no wonder our government looks the way that it does. If people aren't getting paid, they're being considered servants, which again, that's something that came up in episode 3 that I talked to Michael Gaudini about. I was just like, how is this possible? And he's also a city councilor in Pennsylvania. So anyways, yeah, I mean, it's hard because it's like, well, can we expect people to be really available? But also like, that's what you've signed up for. So like, it's this push-pull sort of catch-22 situation. But I really appreciate that for you, Atiim, you do want to be involved and engaged. Obviously, please don't burn yourself out, but that you want to actually be connected to your community. And as you have said, connection is your path, which I love, obviously, because it's mine too. So I love that. Yeah. So what are the biggest issues for you? Like, what are the things that you want to work on or help with in the city?
Here's what I've been doing with my communication with folks that I meet with my hand-in conversation with them, my little elevator pitch. I mean, all the issues that Portland is experiencing are no different in as far as category to issues that every other city, big city and each state is faced with. I think the bespokeness, if that's a word, this movie set city, as my cousin would call it. Oh, it's a movie set, man. It's beautiful.
Oh, interesting.
It's been discovered. People are like, don't say anything about Portland now. It's too late, bro.
Yeah.
The pandemic brought a lot of people here. Look, it's been accelerated because of the pandemic, and because we haven't been dealing with it as frequently as someone like myself from the other coast has seen and has witnessed and experienced. It's people are aghast. This is amazing. This is not my city. I want that building to stay the same. I'm a therapist. When we get into new terrain, we want to kind of revert back to what is comforting to us, to remind us of what's familiar, of what worked for us. And we have to make changes too. So all these questions on how is on the table. What is similar in a lot of ways, but nuanced too, very different. How we do it is the question, and who's the right person for the job is the question right now. I want to ensure equity in housing. I want to support public safety and health, right? I want to work on the transportation system, protect our environment. We have a coal pile. My daughter had lead that consequently forced us, because of DHHS saying that we couldn't rent our downstairs out. We own a duplex. They almost put us out of a home. Some of the hows have unintended consequences. And I want to make sure that whatever legislative, I'll coin this phrase, legislative interventions we put forward, we have to invite more people to the table so we don't have more unintended consequences when we're just thinking up here about what makes sense because this is what I've done in my regular job. No, we have to be creative. We have to be thoughtful, and we have to invite more people to the table to understand before we make it a clear law that it's going to have more positive, more added value than negative consequence. Deficit.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big job that you're willing to take on here. So I'm really impressed. I mean, I know from doing Leadership Portland that you and I both did in different cohorts. I was in the second cohort. Atiim was in the first, that took like 3 years to complete because of COVID. But it's an incredible program that helps you understand sort of what's going on within the city and how different things work. And you have 9 different days where you're focused on different parts of the city. So like education and healthcare and housing, which every single thing came back to housing. Everything came back to housing and dealing with the unhoused crisis, right? So I think that there are big issues at hand, and I really commend you for being willing to take this on. And I especially appreciate you being someone who wants to connect with your constituents, because I think that is the most essential thing about being in office, is actually connecting with the people that you are serving. And so that's a big deal. It is a big deal. And so because we were talking about the Black perspective on this podcast, I would like to know, is there anything that you want to share? Have you had any experiences that have been specifically about you being a Black man running for office in Maine?
Maybe not directly yet. Well, actually, I had one statement where somebody says he looks too young to be in that position, to even be running for city council. And I thought about that. I was like, wow, am I being like infantilized? Am I being...
There's a lot of really young city councilors, by the way. A lot that I am sure are much younger than you. So that's...
I mean, I'll take it as a compliment. You want to see my ID, but...
Do our politicians need to be old? Like, what is with that? Do you kind of want them to be peers more than just old dudes?
I couldn't help, Brad. I couldn't help but wonder, is it because I'm Black? And those things pop up for me as a filter, right? I tend to set those questions down and walk away from them sometimes because I don't really feel like that frame of logic helps me in the long run.
Right, of course. Yeah.
I feel like it taps into a place that sinks me down into other pieces that I know are affected by that reality. So I try not to be surprised and that's crazy because it's like carrying this undigested wound around me, which is trauma. And trauma is an undigested experience. So if I'm always chewing on this piece, it's not fully digested, and maybe it's just a part of me. So is it because I'm Black she said that? But I have had a very clear email from someone when I worked for Portland Ovations before that told me that, hey, you might be having a great time, but welcome to Maine. This is also a part of Maine, too. I had an email from someone of the constituents when we had done a freedom walk with over 200 neighbors of ours in the city and walked along, started off at the Obsidian meeting house, and I thought maybe 20, 30 people would show up, ended up being like 200 plus. And we walked a lot of the Underground Railroad. It was an amazing day. All that to say, I emailed this list of people, telling them about this wonderful experience, telling them about and highlighting the Black experience of Maine and Maine's bicentennial, which was the pandemic. And I got an email back and said, he was polite. Please don't send me any emails regarding niggers. Thank you.
Who did you send wait, what? What was the email to?
The email were to people who are interested in events that Portland Ovations puts forward.
Oh, gosh.
And I was highlighting because my job was to organize community engagement. And that was a clear no for this person. And, Amy Peters, she's a sweetheart. She went to the police department. I said, Amy, like, the police department's not going to do anything about this. Anybody can send me this. I'm fine.
Right. Well, I'm sorry that you have that. That's terrible and infuriating and ignorant at every level. So I'm sorry that you had that experience. Well, going back to the comment that I made earlier about how important I think it is that, as Rabbi Salem Pierce has said, that we have a multiracial, multi-faith democracy. I believe that that is true on the national level, but also on the local level. And so for me, I believe that your perspective is very important. And I believe that your perspective is important, not just because you're a Black man, but I do think that it is important for that voice to be heard. And I think that you bring so much to the table in terms of your understanding of people, your empathy, your therapy background, but also your engagement. You are an activist, you care about people, you want to connect people, and you want to affect change. change, and you're asking good questions and tough questions and bringing up tough stuff, which I think is necessary for somebody who is in a role of leadership. So I think you would be a great candidate, and I am sad not to live in District 2 where I could vote for you. So thank you so much for sharing, Atiim. Is there anything else that you want to share before we sign off?
Yeah, I think representation is the way we frame leadership in City Hall or in national politics.
Yeah.
You want to feel seen and heard. It's the world I come from. People feel it seen and heard.
Yeah.
And that gets you a long way. And I also learned that the biggest resource anybody can really highlight as added value or important when it comes to politics or anything else is relationships, people. So if you're not listening, communicating with to understand so that you can reflect them and represent them, you're not representing them. You might be representing a smaller group or a different part of the population or one solo part of the population or maybe pieces of that population. But what I want to do in office is invite those marginalized voices really perceived to the table and talk about the impacts of the issues and get to some place where I have enough information to help devise interventions that maybe everybody won't like, but they'll see themselves reflected in and respect. Right. So I think it's important.
And they'll feel heard. Yeah.
Feel heard. And I think it's important. And to explain why it came to certain policy intervention, based off of what I was listening to. So if I'm just coming in with a big group with big issues and to represent one specific portion because we outnumber you, that's more polarization. Going in there to find relationships and to get issues forward, I'm not going in fight.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I do think it also speaks a little bit to Kamala Harris. Representation does matter. And also being willing to listen to the people and hear the people, right? And connect with the people. I do think that she is much better for a multiracial, multi-faith democracy. And also that I think she is better because she is of the people. That's what she said when she went into the DA's office originally. And that is what she continues to say. And so I really appreciate that. And I think it's an important part of your election and the city council. And it goes all the way up to the president. So I think that's an important thing for people to consider when they look at any candidate is how much do you feel that you will be seen and heard and represented within your race with your candidates, whoever it is that is representing you. So yeah, thank you so much, Atiim. Yeah.
Let me give our vice president a flag. No, seriously, just because of what's going on internationally and me not feeling satisfied with the response, I can't not give her flowers. I mean, the highlight to my career is not just in a vacuum. It's because of something that she courageously decided was important for young Black kids and young kids of color, or just for, and it supports not just them, but it supports now in Manhattan, the Netherlands, all these different programs that popped up because of the young adult court, which would have happened if Back on Track wasn't there. Those interventions would not be in our world now if she didn't make those changes, if she didn't make that happen. So she's creative. And I also know that as district attorney of a place like San Francisco, there's a lot of politics that you have to maneuver through. Right. And then in the state of California, a lot of politics that you have to maneuver through. So I'm sure she's taking it to the next level when it comes to the politics and people and issues that she has to maneuver through. So I know I can only imagine how difficult it is, but she's creative. So I hope that creativeness that she has and that connection she has to the root that we're both tapped into. Right. Comes out and flourishes and produces some of the most beautiful fruits and flowers that we can see. May it be so. Thanks for listening, everybody. You can find out more about Atiim. I will have his website in the show notes, and then you can also find him on Instagram at ATIIMBOYKIN. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you next time. Thank you. Thanks for joining me for this episode of The Connected Way. You can find all the resources mentioned in the show and even more resources in the show notes and on the podcast page at theconnectedway.com/podcast. Before you go, a note about sponsorship.
This podcast is currently sponsored by me, Rev Dev, and you, the listeners. If you're interested in supporting the podcast and the work of the Connected Way, enhancing individual and collective connection to self, others, the land, and spirituality, you can donate on the podcast webpage. There is never any pressure or expectation, but if you feel called to support the work, any contribution of any amount helps, as do your good thoughts. And finally, I'd love to hear your biggest takeaway from today's show. What inspired you? What surprised you or made you think? Let me know by posting a comment on any of the posts or DMing me on Instagram, or of course, you can always send me a message on the website. Thanks again for being here, friends. May this podcast bring more connection to you and the collective. And so it is. See you next time.